pleased to say our next speaker is David Bush, and he's a consultant with eMotion, and he's going to talk about shooting and posting 3D from RED.
Good afternoon. That was really interesting to hear from Phil. I feel like I'm on very much a learning curve myself, even though I've been working in this industry for many, many years. And the last, it was in 2008, I was in Mumbai, and I was watching a Hindi film, which was a very good film called Jodha Akbar, and it had a lovely dance sequence in the middle of it, with thousands of extras in a great big castle in Rajasthan and this, that, and the other. And I suddenly thought, God, if that was in stereo 3D, it would feel like I was in the middle of it. And I think the increased emotion that stereo 3D can offer to filmmakers is one of the things that's driven me to try to find out how to do it. So I started out in early 2009 in Genoa to test a couple of REDs with different rigs. At the time, the RED was further back than it is now, so there were a lot of fairly difficult issues to solve, for example, synchronization and stuff like that. Not exactly a minor problem. I was kind of intrigued by the fact of trying to get the best images out of a RED, because I thought, I remembered many, many years earlier, Peter Swinson at the time in Ranks Intel had shown me and many other people, I think, how very high resolution images, 4K images, could look extremely good with a fair amount of compression. And evidently this was one of the design features of the RED to start with, obviously being developed with very clever software and so on. But the end result of all of that meant that we had, for the first time, a system that with fairly small disks and so on, and not huge storage requirements, would enable us to shoot stereo to 4K streams, which is not a small amount of data, normally speaking. So I thought, okay, this is an interesting base, and let's see what I can do with it. And the next step, if you like, was figuring out not only how to shoot with rigs or side by side, when to do this, when to do that, which has all been already discussed here to some degree, but which rigs were the most suitable. So the best way of finding out, of course, is nothing other than shooting, testing, which I did lots and lots of examples of, because I wanted to, having been involved in film production for many years, I was more than aware of how important time is on the set. And when you're spending, even for a small budget film, 50,000 a day kind of thing, you don't want to be wasting time waiting for things to be technically tweaked and this, that, and the other. Although I do understand very well the issues related to calibration. So we set out with different rigs, and one rig we settled on to start with was a fairly basic so-called passive rig, which is the Swiss rig. And that's a very good base to start with, but we decided that we needed to do quite a few things to make it work better. And of course that's a learning process, so the fact that we actually built a sort of overslung version for it instead of the underslung version, because it's not easy to balance on most film heads, was a start. After that, I said, why don't we make templates so that we can sling the cameras in instantly to a pre-calibrated position, and we don't need to every time look at how many millimeters there are off, put in crosses and do this and that and the other. So we devised templates for every single prime lens, so that you can just swing in, so that lens changing wouldn't take longer than normal. Also because you need to put in lots of filters. I mean, one issue with most mirror rigs is the polarization issue, where you get reflected highlights that are polarized differently in one camera than the other, and that's a bit of a nasty one. So you need to put in polarizers. I don't know of another way of doing it. If somebody knows, I'd love to know. But you put in polarizers and find the right position for the two of them. Then, of course, all of this stuff weighs the earth. So to move it from a techno crane to to a panther or something would take forever. So we normally have to dismantle every single piece and then so we devised something which looks a bit like when those kings used to go around with 4 bearers and big poles and a seat. This is essentially this whole rig with all the cameras and all the various tri-level sync that you need to make sure that they're in sync, audio connected up and so on. But in order to be able to move it quickly from one situation to another, we devised these great big handles. Of course, that kind of, there are lots of other little bits and pieces, but I won't bore you with the gory details. But learning all of these issues one after the other is actually extremely useful, because now I know how not to do it, and it's more about learning where the difficulties are. I've seen the new generations of rigs coming out now are very nice, and some of them are very compact. The ones that have motors that are balanced are extremely clever, because that's where you never change the balance of the camera you're working with. What else? This is one aspect. Another very important aspect is the post-production, and having seen that images with not too much data could be recorded with very high quality, as they can with the red. Then I thought, right, why are we doing offline online these days? I mean, this is an amount of data that used to be what you used to do with an offline. It's a little bit more than a digital Betacam, if I'm not mistaken, to have 4K R3D files from a red camera. And I thought, well, okay. And I've always had the dream ever since. I used to do a lot of visual effects, and I was often on sets, always working blind, and thinking, wouldn't it be nice if I could see what the hell I was shooting, all these elements, and whether they sit together or whatever. And I'd often talk to directors about using digital cameras for that reason, I must admit. And so I thought, now we have a chance. And at the end of the day, it's actually more efficient to start the post-production process entirely from day one of shooting when you're doing a stereo film. I think you'll find if you try this out as well. And there is no point in doing offline online anymore. What's the point in me having to convert everything to some other format, not be able to see it correctly in that format, then have to go back to another format and reformatize it, and then see whether it's so much more easy to actually look at what you're doing on a scene-by-scene basis. Every single shot that gets done, put it into your post system nearby to where you're shooting, whether it's on location, whether it's in a studio, or whatever, because most post systems are no longer great big facilities in Soho, but just a little box kind of thing. So as long as you can have, and I was intrigued to hear that with the documentary in Africa, there was a screen that was used to check how things were going. And I think once you've gone to the degree of having good quality control, which is seeing it on the screen, then you might as well go ahead with the post-production, because basically you're using almost the same amount of equipment to do that with. So I think it turns out to be actually more efficient for the production if you can start post-production from day one. Because of today's technologies, luckily, the native material always remains in its original form, and anything that we do to it is like color grading or editing is merely metadata that we associate to it. So we can go on doing that from day one of production. It helps the production become more efficient and realize that, oh, we finished with that location. Oh, we don't need that actor anymore. Oh, we have a problem with the back focus on that camera. We have, a number of things I've seen over the years happen on film sets. Makes me think that it really is worthwhile trying to sort them out while you're actually shooting. And the same is also true with the audio. What I've tested in Genoa was getting the audio from the master audio device, whatever that is, like WAV files. Make that the master time code for the reds as well, so that the reds are slaved to it and having the same time code. So it makes synchronization an extremely simple job because the time codes are all the same and the metadata associated with it is the same. And basically, when you're loading your material into the post-production device, just put the audio, the master audio of the dialogue with it, and you can actually cap the dialogue as well, which saves time afterwards. It's like 2 or 3 weeks that would have been done in a particular session for doing what's called audio editing of the dialogue and so on. You're doing it while you're on set, so that incidentally, if there are some glitches or missing takes, the actor's actually there, and it doesn't take much to actually record them as well. The same in the same fashion that it's an efficient way of sorting out any issues in the images as well. Simpler fashions, and I think that all of this kind of adds up to a logic of which I would call, which a friend in Italy always called l'arte della riscrittura, which means the art of rewriting. So that from day one of the filmmaking process, I'm kind of rewriting it, and everybody's there. The director of photography can give his input or her input in terms of the color grading, so it kind of grows on a daily basis. The same with the editing, the same with the audio. So I think it's now that technology is enabling us to have this kind of a possibility that we couldn't have dreamed of in the past. I think it makes sense to look at the whole post-production process and turn it upside down and have it going from day one. I think at the end of the day, it'll turn out to be a saving for the entire production. And actually, in all of the productions that I'm involved in the coming months, it's something I want to do because I want to actually save time and get the production being more efficient. I think I've run out of time. Okay.
Thank you very much.